So here I am on a Zoom call. Done many of these over the last 18 months, and here we are again. But this isn't a COVID Zoom call. This is a Zoom call because Peter, that I'm talking to now, is over in New Zealand. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Peter. I wonder if you could just, for the benefit of those that are just watching this video, just show me the view out of your window and just tell us a bit about what you're doing there in this hotel.
Okay. Well, I'll show you the view first, and I'll come back to describing what I'm up to. So, can you see that, Paul?
I can see that really clearly. What a contrast from where I am, which is in the dark, cold office in my back garden with the heater on, and I'm still cold. What a contrast.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? But I'm and it is such a contrast too, because we're going to talk about Scargill in a minute. But yeah, it is such a contrast going from the intensity of a Christian community to what is effectively here for me isolation, where I'm not seeing anybody. So the contrast couldn't be more stark, really, which in itself is quite interesting. But I'm in New Zealand because my son is getting married later on, well, in fact, February next year. And because it's such a complex place to get to, I decided I'd come over early. So I've arrived in New Zealand in isolation in Wellington for 7 days. And today is day 5 of 7. And we're just been talking with the military who are overseeing the facility here in Wellington about my departure on Saturday. So looking forward to that.
Mm. So you've had this long trip over, you're in isolation, but you mentioned there about Scargill, which is really what you and I wanted to get together to do this little video about. And you mentioned there the contrast. So just tell us a bit about when you were in Scargill and a little bit about your experience.
So Scargill is a Christian community who between them essentially run a Christian centre, which has guests coming for group programs or individual retreats or even just a holiday or just a time to rest and recover. And the community just run this retreat centre. So my time there was as part of the full-time community, helping to run the centre and serve and support guests. And it was an extraordinary time, really, an enriching time, a very positive experience where you're living with a group of Christians, sharing a common task, working, worshipping together, praying together, having, enjoying fellowship every day, many times in the day with the same people, same group of people, sharing your vulnerabilities and your struggles and the difficulties of living out the life that Jesus taught us to live, really, the life of prayer and worship and service. So it's an extraordinarily intensive and emotional experience, but absolutely amazing. I guess that's the sort of good piece of it. But of course, it's not easy living in a community like that either, because we're all human beings and we say things that we perhaps don't think enough about before we say them. We act in a way sometimes without thinking and without realizing how it can annoy people, frustrate people. So of course, there's all of that side that goes on too. It's not easy living in such an intensive community where tensions do flare up from time to time. You realize you've hurt someone or they've hurt you. And I guess a little story really, but there was a sort of a saying that people had, and during times that were particularly tense or something had happened and people knew that maybe it was going to get an interesting reaction, we might just share a wry smile or raise an eyebrow or even just say EGR was the initials people used, and what it means was extra grace required. So it's just that moment of tension where we all just, okay, we just need to be more than our normal graciousness at this point, and be a little bit extra gracious to forgive and overcome that situation. So it's not without its difficulties living in a community like that. But of course, that teaches such a lot about yourself and other people as well, because these are our brokenness. This is our sinfulness and our thoughtlessness as human beings coming to the fore. So it teaches you a lot about grace. It teaches you a lot about compassion, and helps you realize that maybe, and I'm certainly not as gracious as probably I would like to think I am. I'm not as compassionate as I would like to think I am. And it teaches you something about what being humble really means, and what things like ego and your own agenda, it puts those things in perspective, because of course there's something much bigger going on at Scargill than just me or other individuals that are there. God is at work there, and we are there as a community to serve God. So it teaches you a lot about yourself as well. And those things are not always easy to learn or easy to accept. So a great experience. Fantastic group of people up there. Wonderful to be part of that intensive relationship, but not necessarily an easy choice of lifestyle either.
So what I hear you describing there, really, Peter, is that sense of actually living in that place 24/7, working together, praying, having fellowship together, having meals together, and that sense of community. But it's really in that place where the everyday reality of your faith and who we are as humans is exposed, and you see that side of people, both good and bad.
Yes, absolutely right, Paul. And of course, that's what we are. We are human beings. We're not, we are, even the disciples had tensions between them at times. We're not, it was quite interesting, I thought anyway, and a number of people have sort of made different analogies about what this means, but the community at Scargill is really there for no other reason other than to provide a space for people, for guests to come to be refreshed and renewed, to retreat, to join a group program or whatever may bring them there. So the community is simply buildings, for team, which is really just a space that people come to. And it's actually God that's doing the work. It's the Holy Spirit that's moving there. And it's through the Holy Spirit that people are being renewed and refreshed. And it's such a joy to sort of read the feedback that we get as community as people are leaving, when they're talking about how the community simply provided things in the background, and that they really felt God was working. They had a sense of God's presence there, and it sort of reminds us. It reminded me anyway that when you're having a bad day within the community, when you've something's happened that's made it a bit more tense than perhaps you'd like it to be, those things don't really matter, because it's all we are doing is simply providing this facility, this space, and that there is something so much bigger going on at Scargill than simply the relationships within the community and that sort of loving presence. It's a place where God is working and people are feeling that experience, and I think that's the really exciting piece about what I've experienced and seen at Scargill in my time there.
And certainly for myself, some people won't know, but in October I came up for a week and came and joined the community myself, joined you. We did some work around the estate, but actually having been there for a week, that hearing you describe that about the way that God's at work, and we're just a part of that in this community where we are sharing every aspect of life together, because that's what it is to live in community. And I think for me that was very evident very quickly, and I felt at home, and I felt at peace probably by the end of the first day, with the welcome I got from the people I met. Obviously easier because I knew yourself and you were there looking out for me. But certainly I can testify as someone who's come and visited for a week, just how evident that is. And the regular amount of time we would spend together in chapel, or tea and cake, or food particularly, in those things, how the presence of God was there. And it's hard to describe that to people. It's hard actually even to quantify it yourself. But I think it was very evident, because when I came back, I had that real sense of being totally refreshed after, the battering of the last 18 months. And there is something special that you become a part of that something. And I believe that something's God, as you've said.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true, Paul. That's the same thing that so many people, so many guests particularly experience there. And the feedback, even if you have a look on the website, you can see some of the feedback. And it is all about that. It is all about coming away feeling refreshed. Well, first thing being welcomed, and actually feeling, as a guest, being drawn into the community immediately. And then feeling this sense of refreshment and renewal. And, the sort of group program has some extraordinary speakers and facilitators. So, sort of people talk about Scargill as being one of those thin places, where God seems to reach down through a sort of a thinner layer than perhaps other parts. One of the things that I found, there's sort of a couple of sort of detailed things really, but I found the regular rhythm, which is a sort of a very sort of modern monastic take on it. But 3 times a day, 4 times some day, in the chapel, prayers, some worship, some praise, spread throughout the day, which just grounds you again in your relationship with God. And it doesn't matter what's going on the community, what tasks you might be doing, what tables you might be stripping and preparing, what play equipment you might be painting, Paul. At least during those 3 or 4 times during the day, you are grounded back in our foundation, really, which is such a strong sort of direction or sense of stability when you're there.
And
I think the other thing that
I was going to say, how you and I found that a challenge at times, didn't we, when we were working on the estate in the middle of doing something, and then suddenly look at your watch and time for chapel. But I think probably we both would say that that there's something special about that. The short periods during the day, throughout the day, the same time every day, where you do just stop and you come together and you do focus back in on God. So irrespective of what you're doing work-wise, actually there's that grounding. And I certainly, having never experienced it to that degree before, I found it really quite helpful. And that sense for me of having had a busy 18 months with everything that's been going on with COVID and the stresses that's caused for so many of us, desperately knowing I needed a rest. And there was something about that periodic stopping, reflecting, as you say, praying, worship, being with others in the community, that I think is a big part of what Scargill is about.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And I think it's interesting with people like you and I, and we're not alone in this, who have worked hard in our careers and will often put work ahead of everything else. It's an interesting rebalancing when you are busy doing something on the estate and you're halfway through something and you suddenly realize actually it's time for chapel. It's actually quite hard to put everything down and leave something half done and go off to chapel. But it is such a strong reminder that, you know, work is not the only thing that we are to do. We are called to pray and to worship, to spend time with one another in fellowship and sharing. And it's an interesting challenge to rebalance that. I have to say, having come back from Scargill, I'm not sure I've learnt very much, and I'm able to rebalance things any better.
I think I could probably say the same, Peter. Yeah.
But I think I was also going to say, Paul, I think the sort of part of that I found, it was certainly new to me in this scale, was the periods of silence. So, you know, as you know, typically during those times in chapel, and I think the morning prayers and the lunchtime prayers particularly, there would deliberately be periods of silence left within the prayers. The person leading the prayers would leave, and often quite long periods of say a 15-minute sort of period of prayer in the chapel. 10 minutes might have been left as silence. And that's something I hadn't experienced on that scale before, which for me has become extraordinarily powerful. And just a reminder too that, you know, we can often spend our whole time talking, praying, but actually not just stopping and waiting and listening and giving the Holy Spirit a chance to talk, to influence and be present as well. So that is certainly something that I've tried to take away from there and stop sort of gabbling on and let just allow these periods of silence and waiting and expectantly for something to happen. I think one of the other things about Scargill is its location. It's in the most extraordinary location within the Yorkshire Dales, surrounded by just amazing scenery and miles of walking and things. And it's just a constant reminder of the work of our Creator God, which brings another sort of sense of God's presence at Scargill.
And the wonderful walk that you and I did on the highest peak with the wonderful views.
With the wonderful views in the mist and the fog.
In the mist and the fog, we could see about 6 foot, but I'll take your word for it.
Yes, Great Whernside, one of the Yorkshire peaks.
Yeah. But no, I did have the opportunity that week to walk and just the scale of the place. You talk there about this thin layer, the thin layer between us and God, and there's something about just the place, the mountains, being outside, and certainly I totally agree that's very much a big part of it. So Peter, I came to Scargill for a week in October. I have to be honest, that was really because I know you and I knew you were there and we'd had a conversation before you went. But there must be, I'm sure, people watching this, they might be interested to find out more. They may be even through this video thinking, actually, maybe this is somewhere I'd like to go. Maybe this would be a good place to go for myself. How would someone go about that? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I think the first step would be to have a look at the website, which is Scargill Movement. And there is a tab there about joining the community, and there's quite a bit of background information about what's involved. There is an application form to be filled in, and ideally they would quite like to meet people who are interested in joining before or during the process of the application. So it would probably involve a visit there. And I think that is just useful for people to get a bit of insight before you commit to something going on. So I'd suggest that's a starting point. I guess people could speak to you or I, Paul. We've both got some experience there. But I guess what I would say is that it's a fantastic experience. There's no question of that, and it's enriching and very positive. But it's not without its challenges as well. So anyone who was thinking of perhaps looking to join should not go along with any sense that it's going to be easy, that it's going to be a great time, because it is a challenging time too. But of course, that's what we need to go through as people too. We do need to be pruned so that new growth can appear, and pruning is never a painless process. So without that, the growth and the sort of regeneration is not there either. But I would say don't hesitate. At least explore it if people were interested. They are looking for new community members all the time, and you'd be, they would make anybody, as you know, extraordinarily welcome. And I don't know. I will certainly be going back at some point, probably not as a full-time community member, but going up there as a friend to work for a week or two on particular tasks that they need some help with. And that is always another option for people. They could go there as a working friend to experience something of community life for short periods of time.
And the other thing I noticed when I, obviously having been there, seen a little more of what goes on there and looking at the website, they do run various sort of courses and activities, don't they? So there is that other option of going and saying, well, actually, I'm going to do a week where there's this course, this activity that's already organised, and just go as a guest for the week. And there's numerous ones of those that people could get involved in, which I would suggest actually is a great way, isn't it, to see the community and get a feel for what the place is.
Yes, yes, you're quite right. Yes, that would be a great way to have an introduction to what goes on up there, and certainly meet some of the people. And that might be a great way then to meet and have a conversation with some of the key people, some of the leadership team, some of the pastoral team, to just get some insight. Yeah, a good suggestion.
Great. So, Peter, well, thank you for your time. I know you've got a lot of time at the moment because you're 5 days into just living in a hotel room and not going anywhere. But even so, it's nice to connect in this way. Lovely to catch up with you. But thank you for, just talking a little bit about your Scargill experience. And in a few months' time, when you're home, we look forward to hearing more about it.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for setting this Zoom connection up. It's nice to see someone even via Zoom during this time of isolation in New Zealand. So I look forward to my return.